Here's what I like to call my shop laptop. I use it when I'm working on computers, doing other little things, and use it to kind of Google stuff, watch YouTube, copy files onto USB drives, other little things. I got it as an e-waste find a little bit ago. Nothing super special about it. It was, I think, a higher-end laptop of the day of the Dell Studio brand, which I think they've since killed off. Has many of the relics from the mid-2000s that I hate in computers, like these touch-sensitive buttons at the top. They was like, oh, I'm gonna put the power button at the side for some weird reason. Gets super beat up. It only works when the screen's folded out also. So it won't even turn on unless the screen's at this angle. Otherwise it just stays off, which is weird. It has like a touchpad. It's fine. It's a laptop. In the internals it has 4 gigs of DDR2, which was about as much as you could get practically in DDR2. You can get 8 in these, but it's kind of in the pretty darn expensive because you're running pretty old systems to get that much RAM. You can see the top of it is really beat up and scratched. Looking at the bottom, there's the exact number, Studio 1537. We can see it has the big battery in the day. There you go, 85 watt hour battery, which is quite large for a relatively low power laptop. No dedicated graphics or anything. It has a Windows Vista Home Premium key. That's I guess what it came with out of the box. Has a cooling vent here, which is surprisingly blocked for airflow because half of it seems to be disabled. Overall, it's relatively a fine older laptop, and I just kind of in the what should I do with it when it comes to OS and hardware. So the first thing I did when I got it is it came wiped, so I was like, okay, I'll put in one of my old 500 gig laptop hard drives and Windows 10 on it. And Windows 10 is abysmally slow for that use. It gets okay if you only have a browser working and you don't do anything else, but if you're like me, where you run a ton of tabs for no particular reason, it just starts to chug. The moment you start hitting page file on a hard drive, the performance just goes to nothing. That's pretty much unusable. So then I was like, I'm going to try Linux. It's, lighter weight, should handle running on hardware like this a bit better. And it does, a little bit. But then I was like in OpenSUSE, well, it doesn't support the Wi-Fi card. And I'm like, oh great, I don't really want to go down the Broadcom Wi-Fi card thing. I'm pretty sure I can get it working, but I was like, I'm going to try something else. So now I'm back to Windows, and I'm like, I could run something else. So it should run XP, Vista, 7, 8, and 10 all reasonably well and supported. I'm kind of tempted to try 8 now, thinking of that. 7, I actually don't have any Windows 7 systems still laying around, so I'm kind of wanting to try that. XP, I don't really need XP enough, and it's pretty much not usable as a daily driver. Vista, I don't see a point for it. And now I'm kind of tempted to try Windows 8 on it. Windows 8's kind of this weird mix of some Windows 7 legacy stuff, but some of the Windows 10 stuff, and Windows 10 is slowly, as time goes on, trying to replace the Windows 7 and older legacy things. Like Control Panel just kind of keeps getting pushed in the background, and they'll keep pushing the Modern Settings app, and Windows 8 was just at the very beginning of that, so it was more and more Windows 7 stuff and less modern UI. One interesting habit I've kind of acquired is I have a reasonable amount of SSDs. I think I have about 3 in storage right now of about 120 gig capacity. All working fine, but I don't want to use them because I'm always afraid that if I have another project that I need an SSD for, I won't have it. And that's happened in the past. So now I'm in this conserve the SSD, which is I think why this guy ended up with a hard drive in the first place. But now that I have the SSDs laying around, it's like, well, yeah, might as well use them for a system, especially like this, which actually gets hours put on it, and actually use. So I've always in this like, you gotta conserve the SSD, which is weird mindset, but I guess it's fine. And here we are inside it. Nothing too exciting. Hard drives come out with the full 8 screws, 4 for the tray and 4 for the actual drive. Looking inside at other things, there's really not much to see. We can see the heat pipe going to the CPU here, with the chipset presumably under here. I think they had a spot for an optional graphics card. I want to say like here, but this one does not have it. It has the Intel integrated graphics, which, especially from the Core 2 Duo era, was quite bad. We can see the 2 gig sticks of DDR2, which was showing it's probably one of the last of the DDR2 systems where 4 gigs was kind of the accepted amount for a higher-end system, and it was still DDR2. And see it has a DVD drive as well. It's a slot loading, which is relatively uncommon in Windows laptops. Apple seems to have always loved it. It is a socketed system here. I don't have too many I think 2 gigahertz is a bit higher. I was curious one night on eBay and I was looking up, could I put a faster CPU? And I think technically I could get a 3 gig CPU to work in. But people want to charge a ton of money for those chips. I think they're like still $50 or something on eBay because they're top of the line. So unless you go down to like the 2.6s, you don't get them super cheap, like the $5-10, which is in my screw it, let's spend the money category. And then in that point, it's like, why bother? It's not even that big of an improvement. And I don't think I'm even that CPU limited, because on these older systems, by the time they get this old, yeah, the CPU is a limit, but if you upgrade the CPU very much, you don't really feel the improvement, because you're then going to be limited by things like your RAM, you're going to be limited by a slow bus speed, and just a lot of other, it's an aging system. So, here's the hard drive I had in it, apparently. It's an Apple hard drive, it's a 500 gig, I wonder what this guy's from. My guess is this is probably from some old laptop that I do. I do a reasonable amount of, I can swap your SSD for you, for friends and stuff, and I get the, you want the old hard drive? No, I don't care, so I get the old hard drive. Which is why I end up with a pile of 500 gig laptop drives, which nothing to do with. With the amount of 500 gig laptop drives I have laying around, I'm kind of tempted to get one of those DAS enclosures that takes like 24 in a 2U enclosure, and just set them up in a big RAID array, like put a big RAID 6 or RAID 10 or something of them, and make a big network share. Because if you can get like 20 500 gig laptop drives from in RAID, you probably have about 8K usable. It's not awful. No, reasonably power efficient and quiet. The annoyance is, by the time you buy the enclosure, it's almost cheaper to just buy a single or dual 8K desktop drives. And you get more space, and it's cheaper, and it's lower power, and it's nicer. So I'm putting an 80 gig SSD in, putting my let's conserve the good drives mentality, but 80 gig should be more than plenty, because all my files and like home folder stuff is all on the network, because this is going to be ran on a domain, and then I don't install that many programs. There won't be any games or anything on here anyways, it's just going to be used for basically web browsing. Why Windows 8? I want to play with Windows 8. I've never really played with it much. I used Windows 7 quite a bit. And then Windows 8 came along and never really got adopted, and by the time Windows 7 started getting old and it was like it's time to replace, Windows 10 got good enough, and Windows 8 was basically forgotten. So, what's my luck? I booted it up, and it didn't want to boot from a USB drive for some weird reason. It would just hang and wouldn't even let you do anything when I selected the USB drive, which was odd. But I discovered my SSD I put in it just happens to have Linux Mint on it. Which is great, except for the fact that the Wi-Fi doesn't work. It seems to have some Broadcom. Like I said earlier, it's probably possible to get it to work, but I don't really want to do that. Also, from the looks of this SSD, it seems to have been a 32-bit install, because I was using it for an old system. Surprisingly, I booted up without an issue. But let's see if it gives us the CD drive. Oh, it's working this time. It used to be, it just stopped at the bar at the end and wouldn't do anything. So now it's giving me the Windows 8.1 installer. So we're going to get this installed on here and see how that goes and see how it runs on this hardware. Well, I'll say one thing, it's been quite a while since I've used Windows 8, because I don't really remember this. I'll call you Studio. I can connect to Wi-Fi, or I can just plug a network cable in, or I can click skip this step. I can do express settings. We're going to customize and turn all this off. And here we are, dropped into the 8.1 desktop. Man, it's been a while. And this is 8.1, the newer version, not even the original 8. So we still get the start menu, which no one liked. Let's see, Task Manager. I don't think they've really touched Task Manager since Windows 8. I think the only thing they've done is like they've added a few details here and they've added GPU support. I still like this design a lot more than what they had in Windows 7. It shows disk usage a lot more, which I think is quite underrated when it comes to performance. And you can see the CPU is happily chugging along doing, what is it doing? Probably setting up something. Yep. .NET Runtime Optimization Service, whatever that is. So at 0.9 gigs of RAM at the desktop, which truly is not bad. We see the boot drive and an external drive. And then we're going to see the boot disk, which looks like we're using 14 gigs. That's truly not bad. Under properties, we can see, yeah, well, 13.7 gigs used, which is not that bad in the scheme of things. Yeah, so one issue I've had with 8, and 10's getting a bit better, is the control panel is still pretty usable in 8, but they have the new settings too. Let's see if they still have it full screen in 8. Oh yeah, they do have it full screen. So here's PC settings, which, I don't know, they like having it full screen here. Oh, and it's the arrow that tells you like how to... No, that was weird. And it was kind of like, oh, you have your old school desktop and the new programs, and you should be using all these new ones. And I love how this is just like not useful stuff on here. It's lovely. And it has the weirdest, we're going to put... Windows 10 has put enough that you can get away with only using settings for most people. And control panel is this stuff that they've either forgotten about or not bothered to put in the new versions. So I think you can Alt-Tab. That's weird. But you can't make those... Windows 10 was like, okay, screw it. We're just going to make these standard windows and make everything on the desktop. Which is like, that's what everyone wanted. And add a tablet mode, which was kind of like that. Because, yeah, no one's going with Microsoft's. Let's all push everyone to do this. Let's do Windows Update. I'm going to turn on updates. So, Windows 10 gets a lot of flack for not letting you turn off updates. But I actually generally like Windows 10 updates a lot more than 7 and 8. Because it does cumulative updates, so that means you only need the latest update for your device. So you only need like the latest month. So right now that would be April's update. You don't need all of them. And in Windows 8 and before, a lot of the times, unless you got a roll-up, you'd have to install them all. So I like how they do cumulative updates. And I kind of like that they force them, because for most users it's a really good idea. Because I see a lot of people in Windows 7 turn Windows Update off. And go like, well, we don't need that, because it doesn't do anything useful. It's like, oh, the amount of vulnerabilities that Windows Update is fixed. This is where you're starting to see the performance. It's weird it's sitting at 1.8, because it should be a 2 gig chip. The only worrying thing I have is thermals. This guy seems to run quite hot for what it is. I'm not sure why. It's not an incredibly power-hungry chip. This, for whatever reason, checking for updates seems to take an extremely long period of time, even with pretty high-end hardware. I'm not sure what it's doing. I still feel like Linux handles the whole update system a lot better in a cleaner manner than Windows does. Another thing I have to give Windows 8 credit for that it does a lot better than Windows 7 and before, and Windows 10 does even better, was just driver support. Windows 10's gotten quite good at this, where you can just kind of install drivers from Windows Update and it generally works. Whereas with Windows 7 and especially like XP, you need to have all the drivers for your devices, because the default ones just sucked. Like now, like network works fine, whereas like if I had XP on this, I could almost guarantee network would not work out of the box, especially Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi works out of the box on this guy, which is nice. Still checking for updates. Another weird thing I like with Windows 8, they still have the thick boundaries, which I think are weird, especially since this is a 1280 by 800 screen. Like these, I don't know how many pixels, probably it's like 5 to 10 pixels, look huge. Which I think is weird. I mean, I guess it gives you extra room to grab it. There's technically settings buried in there that let you change it. The other weird thing is it's this weird mix between kind of like the skeuomorphism, kind of like old style Windows 7 UI arrow style, and like the super modern, like flat theme you get with Start. And it's like, ooh. Windows 8 feels like a lot of, we want this modern OS. Like, I think iOS was kind of like that at the time, and Android is, where it's just like, you have apps, you don't touch the internals, but they know they could never sell that to businesses, so they kind of had to slap that on top of old Windows, and you get an ugly mess. Windows 10's kind of cleaned it up, but I think it's still a weird, and if you look at how Windows 10S is going, it's like, they want this iOS-like experience, because it does improve a lot of things for security, because you like requiring you to run code from them, so you can't run random programs, would really help with a lot of virus and malware issues. But the problem is, there's a lot of people built around traditional Windows administration, which is kind of built into running scripts that use a lot of old features. So it's this weird middle ground Windows has to get. My personal review is Windows, they know they have to take it slow. Because if they do it quickly, why would I still use Microsoft stuff? Because there's Apple and Google with Android and Linux that does, I'd argue, a lot of the modern stuff and management a lot better than Microsoft seems to be doing. Oh boy, and we got a big one. 143 updates with about, I don't know why it gives you a range. Oh, it gives you a range for the amount of space it needs, but 2.5 gigs of downloads. That's gonna be fun. I guess I'll come back. I've been using this laptop for a couple days now, and realistically it's been working pretty well performance-wise with an SSD. If you haven't tried it before, an SSD provides an amazing performance difference. And while the CPU is definitely pretty limiting, it gets away with doing what I need to do. So here's like a VLC live stream from an RTSP stream on the network. I have things like Proxmox going with all my virtual machines on it. And if I just go to a new tab and load up, let's say, the Wikipedia homepage, it definitely takes much longer than the other systems I have on my network, and even Wikipedia is quite a small page. If I load something larger, like I think the New York Times is a relatively large homepage they have with quite a bit of like photos and other media in it. It definitely takes time, but it's usable for what I'm doing, and like if you're playing a video, once you get it going, it's fine. So, and like if I just scroll through it, like that was a delay, but it's not awful. Looking at the system, it's just pinning the CPU, that's its issue. And I can also hear the fan winding away. Maybe the thermal paste could help it, but I don't think it's just that. The next thing to talk about is the Windows 8-ness of it. So it still has a start menu. There's third-party start menus, but realistically, I haven't even really noticed this, because pretty much I'm normally in Chrome, Firefox, and that's about it on here. Sometimes I'm doing some like network testing and stuff in command prompt. That's about it. I can still use it normally, like where I type it and just search for something, and it'll open it like any other taskbar does. I don't use a taskbar to like open it and open apps. This sucks at doing it. It's so weird how they did this, but yeah. I really don't notice it. I know I can put third-party programs in, but I haven't even been bothered to. Windows Update hasn't really been bugging me since it's gone. Does it? It tells me about optional updates, but really I'm not touching it, and it hasn't been long enough where you get that many updates. The UI, there's so many weird differences from it compared to 10. I'd say overall I like the 10 UI better. Overall the UI is a kind of interesting experience because there's a lot of like the File Explorer icon has a skeuomorphism that they had in Windows 7. There's some very flat, especially with the new modern icons. Windows 10 has kind of helped it, but it's still kind of a mess when it comes to icons. And there's also a lot of like really legacy code in here as well, same with Windows 10. So it's this weird hodgepodge, it seems to be. But for daily use, it's pretty much, I've yet to have any issues of software running on it. All programs pretty much support it. Anything that works on Windows 7 and 10 pretty much run fine. Would I suggest running it? No, I'd say run 10 unless there's a good reason not to. For all the flack that Windows 8 got in the start of having its weird modern UI, it really is not a bad OS under the hood. I think they've given it quite a few kernel tweaks since Windows 7 and tried to optimize a lot of how things work under the hood, but like anything, it's not perfect, and Windows 10 has definitely improved on that. Things like boot up time seem to have improved quite a bit from older OSs because I think it uses fast boot. These provide a massive performance boost. I was even kind of surprised myself because this system was almost unusable with a hard drive with the workload I'm putting it on. I have about the same thing now with an SSD. And you get a few kind of delays, but it's just nowhere near as bad. Because swap is the big difference. Swap on an SSD is usable, swap on a hard drive is pretty much get a coffee and wait a few minutes type of thing. You don't want to touch swap on a hard drive.